Being approximately 7 p.m. on the 17th of January, the Foxborough Planning Board will come to order.
This meeting may be accessed remotely via Zoom. For login information, please go to Foxborough, Foxborough, mass.ma.gov/department/planning and click Public Remote Participation Live Link. The meeting will also be broadcast live via Foxboro Cable Access TV, channel 2238, and when required by law or allowed by the chair, persons wishing to provide public comment or otherwise participate in the meeting may do so in person or by accessing the meeting remotely, as noted above.
Very good. So the Planning Board is here to hold a meeting regarding MBTA Communities Multifamily Zoning Work Session. All the members of the Planning Board are here. Barney Overt is here representing the Zoning Board. And in our audience, we have members of the craft group who also are going to weigh in this evening. How would you like to start?
Well, I'll just give some background. As you know, we've been talking about MBTA communities, and the team of Gabby, Barney, and I came forward with our proposal based on some work we did with a consultant through a grant. And the craft group has some different ideas or some of their own ideas. So knowing that they're the landowners out there and they have a vested interest, the board agreed to listen to their proposals and their discussions, and this is really just a work session to hear them out. This is the first time we're all seeing it and hearing it, and I think we just go from there as we figure out what we're going to do. I should note that we had discussed having our public hearing on February 8th, but I just realized I will be away that night, so I think we're looking at the second meeting in February, which is the 22nd. So I know, Kevin, I think you'd be Zooming in. Tracy, you might be questionable that night.
No, February 22nd, I'm here.
Okay, good. So, Jeff, you looking concerned? Are you concerned by that night?
No.
Okay, good. So that's probably more likely the public hearing night, and it gives us a little more time to work through this. The warrant language is due February 15th, so we're working towards that. So we'll go from there.
Okay.
Are we going to be able to?
Well, we're always up against it. You know, you
Okay.
put in what you hope, and we were hoping to do better, but it never works out.
Okay.
So
Great.
we'll have something.
So would someone from the craft group like to start? Sure. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, Peter Tam from Goulston Stores on behalf of the craft group with Dan Krantz and Beth Wehrling. I'll make a brief introduction because I'm new to this discussion, and then I'll turn it over to Dan. We appreciate having an opportunity to meet with the planning board this evening, understanding this is your bylaw, your prerogative. You can choose to comply or not comply. We want to be helpful and assist the board. So I would characterize, I think, Paige's introduction a little bit differently. Rather than an alternative idea, we'd like to support the town in an effort to comply with the MBTA communities law.
Okay.
And in doing so, we'd like to help the town and support the town in any way we can, not only to comply, but to create a bylaw which meets the letter of the law and that, in fact, supports opportunities for housing development that is proximate and safe and convenient to transit, and that can support the multi-billion-dollar investment along the economic driver in Foxborough, which is Route 1. And we think that appropriate housing of an appropriate scale in an appropriate location will support the economic development and the investment that's been made. And that is so critical to this town, and that supports the private investment and the success of the various industries in that area. And so with that in mind, we looked at your direction, your existing bylaw. I had the opportunity to talk to Barney about it. I identified and raised a couple questions, which I think support and need some resolution, mostly pertaining to size and density. And these are issues that are relatively easy to solve. But as part of that, in terms of minimum size as a commuter rail community, we saw an opportunity, and this is where I would characterize Paige's introduction a little bit differently. We saw an opportunity to supplement what you've already worked on. This doesn't require a lot of drafting, doesn't require a lot of revisions, but Barney had mentioned to me, and I think members of the board had suggested the idea of a sub-district that could bring your draft into compliance. And so we see this as potentially additive to your existing work. And it doesn't require a lot of investment, a lot of time, and a lot of energy. And it's fairly straightforward. I always like, there's a reason why the MBTA Communities bylaw or act requires a 50% vote, because the legislature anticipated that there would be resistance or there'd be skepticism of zoning for multifamily housing density in these communities. So the 50% bar is arguably easier than a 2/3 bar, right, to get a normal rezoning done. And I don't think we should necessarily shy away from looking at this from a planning perspective. And I think Dan has a lot of materials, which you guys are familiar with, that show all the time and effort that the community has put in and the directive that you've made to focus on housing in this area in support of transit and also to be supported by transit. So long-winded introduction. I'll turn it over to Dan.
Yeah, I told him he had 1 minute. No, and I do want to personally thank the board because I know we understand it's the board's decision to do this, and I appreciate from the last meeting that you're giving us the opportunity to be heard, and that's what I ask, and I truly do thank you for that. As Peter said, we think it makes a lot of sense having this type of use adjacent to the station in the stadium. And again, our hope is to help make this something that can be compliant and something that the community can be proud of. We have a couple of ideas. Apparently, Diana informed us that some of the 11x17s didn't make the trip, so we're going to rely primarily on the board. So if you're having trouble seeing it, let me know and I can move it around. I do apologize for that. I think, Beth, if you could hand those out. So all that this will require, since you probably got a long way to see, is Dan doing a better job of explaining than he probably usually does. But I will start out to say, the District 2 that was recommended last time we were here is of the 39 acres, and it's still our understanding that it is a 50 acre requirement. And as Peter alluded to earlier, we are just suggesting that maybe a sub-district could be made to make up the difference in the acreage, the 10, 11 acres. District 2 is not ideal from our perspective. It takes up some 4,000.
Which,
This is the District 2, the one that was recommended.
okay, thanks.
Takes up some 4,000 parking spaces. It's in the EDA. And without going too far, and I see Paige and Gabby, thank you for handing those out. I'm not going to go into the long history lessons. I just, if you look at page 3, and I know I've been in front of this board before and we've talked about it, it just, it is a prime location for commercial development, and this is just a note of reminder saying that, it is commercially viable property. that would be great for the tax base of Foxborough, and it is a parcel that we're looking at. And so that's really all that I'm going to say about District 2 at this time. Ashcroft Lane, I understand from, prior discussions that there's some trepidation in that area. I just go back to history a little bit from the town of Foxborough Route 1 economic development analysis done by MAPC. And then again, without going into great detail, the first page is from the Foxborough master plan done by McCabe Enterprises, and then you'll see on the subsequent pages just some information regarding potential transit-oriented development on the east side of Route 1. So again, we like that area. We like that area. It's obviously directly adjacent to the T station. As you can see in these lines that are right here, that's all wetlands, so there ends up to be a significant buffer there. We are exploring the option of potentially access across the tracks directly to stadium parcel.
How many acres is that, Dan? I'm sorry.
So the yellow is developable acres. This is almost 33 acres, but the developable portion of it is 9.8 acres. So there's a sliver right up here next to the tracks that is developable, and that's the area we would suggest might be amenable to this sub-district. The rest of this, as you can see, these dark lines, and again, this is...
We can share.
Yeah, so you can see right through here, that's all wetlands, and this would just remain buffer. And the 9.8 acres are right here tight to the T station.
Okay. Thank you. So can I just ask one question? Well, Paige left us. Did we, maybe Gabby, I know that we were saying, the craft group said last time we met that it was 39 acres, the District 2.
Yeah.
Did we get comp, and that is under what we need? Did we?
Well, the map that we used, unfortunately, was incorrect. So there was missing one parcel that was part of that, and I can pass around the map of the district that should have been used, and that brings us to 50.3 acres.
Okay. So it is there?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks. Sorry, Dan.
No, that's fine. I still like the idea of sub-district.
Well, I think, Tracy, you bring up a good question. The minimum area that's required for compliance is 50 acres. It does not have to be in one single
Right.
area. It can be 25 acres here, and you could have 5-acre sections elsewhere. It also, I think, as you're aware, doesn't have to entirely be within a half acre. You could have disconnected chunks that are further afield. I think half of the overall district could be comprised of a sub-district or sub-districts, which are further removed from transit. And so when Dan is pointing out these locations, you could come up with a district, an overall district, that's comprised of sites. If in fact you do have or are reflecting 50 acres across the street, there are other compliance considerations that relate to density, which is a related concern, but different, right? Because you need 50 acres, you also need 15 units an acre at a minimum. And in Foxborough, you need a total yield at a minimum of 15% of your total housing units, which is some 7,682. And that's where you come up with that yield of 1,152 units.
Can I? Sorry.
Well, I'm going to just finish, and then I'm going to let you
Okay, sorry.
fire away.
Sorry.
That's all right with you.
Fine, please.
Thank you. Next one, as you can see, is Foxborough Terminals. The overall acreage at the terminals is 26 acres. The developable acres, I'm going to have trouble with that all night, 17.8 acres. So at least the idea is, as the concepts that we would like to permit, if you needed the 10 acres, 11 acres, you could take a portion of that and make that one of the sub-districts. Having, 18 acres and maybe needing 10 or 11 acres, you could do that. The next, and again, a lot of the natural buffers are already there for that commercial business, and so, and the vast majority of the traffic concerns, I would think, do not impact the North Street neighborhoods. It's more towards the Route 1 and the impacts around the entrance to the site right here. Lot 23 is another sub-district that we talked about, directly adjacent to the District 2 recommendation. That's roughly 5.5 acres. That's in a relatively dense commercial area right there. So that was another option that we thought we would throw out. And then the final one is again back here, which is our employee parking area at this time. Again, 19.8 acres that could be developed. And again, the housing is back here, so you can see there's quite an immense amount of buffering that could occur from that lot as well. So our intent here tonight, these are some of our thoughts. We just thought we would put them on the table. We obviously didn't come with a lot of bells and whistles because we wanted to make this just an open forum and have the discussion and just really get your thought and your feedback and see what you thought about some of these options.
So I guess the first thing I would say, and not in retort, but as informational to Mr. Tam's supposition, is we could move that land anywhere in the town we wanted to. We looked at places that already have affordable housing in it that could be included. And, so if we wanted to follow your supposition, we could say, okay, we'll put it over where the lodge is, we'll put it over where the domain is, and you'll still get a piece up there. It's not, we're not required, as you said, to have the whole thing there. And I don't think you necessarily understand what an uphill battle this is going to be for you no matter what we do.
This isn't our battle.
I understand that. It
We don't have.
It isn't your
proposal.
battle, but if you want development up there, you need to recognize the fact that this is not going to be an easy win for us or for you at a town meeting.
And quite honestly, that's why we try to keep it to parcels that we control, because if you're gonna have an uphill fight, it's better to have it in one area than trying to divide and conquer, because
the issue remains the same. Those areas that you pointed out, with maybe an exception or so, border on existing housing where the potential for high disagreement amongst the residents who live in that area is quite possible. Like it or not, I think Page's concept was not to say, here's an area that we know you'll never build in. It was an area that tried to meet as close to the letter of the law to be in compliance, and now hopefully we've resolved the 39 versus the 50 plus acres. And we understand that you guys have historically had a different vision for that area, from a business perspective, from parking requirements that you have to have in order to supply the stadium, et cetera. But because it's not as close to existing or proximate to existing housing areas, the feeling is that it had a higher possibility of at least making a positive response, an uphill response, but a higher possibility of getting a positive response at a town meeting. So you're right, it's not your fight, it's the town's issue to try and provide this to be in compliance. And I don't think anybody here in this board is trying to do anything that would not allow you to get some of the things you'd like up there. But I'm just being honest, and I want it on the table that we see this as a very difficult thing. In addition, there's already been plenty of people around town who are very unhappy about this entire thing from the state, having nothing to do with Route 1, the Kraft Group, or anybody else, having to do with the idea that why is a town like the town of Foxborough, which is beyond their compliance, at 12.5% now, and it will be close to 15% when the senior housing component happens on Walnut Street, get cherry-picked, not cherry-picked, get put in a grouping with people who never built a single unit anywhere, because we had a temporary station, and now we have, a full-time station up there, which really raised the bar in terms of acreage, number of units, et cetera. So and even if you don't live there, there's going to be people in town who are going to show up at a town meeting and voice their resentment about that.
And Foxborough's not the only community.
And they're not, but so far, the only one that's really raised a super red flag is Milton.
Right.
They passed it at a representative town meeting, and now they're floating a referendum to go against it.
Wow.
So, this is difficult. It's difficult for the town, and it's difficult for the craft group for not opposing reasons, but for different reasons.
Kev,
Yeah.
could we just try, just for purposes of clarification, so I know, and maybe the rest of the board members, the scattered site approach, from craft group's point of view, is this being presented as just a less onerous alternative to staff's District 2 proposal, or should I be interpreting this as you'd really be interested in exploring some of this, as opposed to being dragged into it?
I think many members of the board would concur that in a limited amount, not necessarily the amount that the MBTA communities is requiring, and in a limited amount, some 250 to 300 units, is something that we've been interested in doing for a number of years. And I don't think that comes to a surprise to many people in this room, because it's been a discussion that we've had off and on over the years. So I would say, to answer your question, yes, there is an interest.
Can I ask a clarifying question on something? When we say 50 acres, is it 50 I can't say the word now, developable?
Yes.
Or is it just 50 acres?
Well, it's 50 acres that isn't classified as like restricted,
Wetlands.
like wetlands. and
Okay,
that
so it's
sort of-
50 developable.
Yes.
Okay.
But it can have, we could put it over, like Kevin mentioned, the lodge or something. It doesn't mean you can have development on it already. The market would dictate whether it would get redeveloped, but it just can't be precluded from development like a wetland would be.
Understood.
Or
Okay,
like a
thank you.
stadium, like we had even looked at throwing it over the stadium, but the town owns it, so that's precluded. So any town-owned land, any roads, right-of-ways, wetlands, those are not included in potential developable areas.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just to pick up on a comment that you had made, to be clear, Dan is offering ideas, and this is not intended to be scattershot.
No,
I just used the term scattered site.
Right. I think what we didn't want to do was raise alternatives which essentially would require that you go back to the drawing board. When the parcel was identified, unbeknownst to us, and that the subcommittee came up with, I think it caught us frankly off guard. And so
Were you made aware of it in November? That was my understanding.
we were not. But, and if in fact you do have 50 acres, I'm curious as to where, if you're rounding that out in the same location or not. But it doesn't resolve the density issues that I think I also identified in my note to Paige and Gabby and Barney, because there is not only the minimum size, but you also need to provide for 15 units an acre, and you need to, through this compliance model, come up with a yield of 1,152 units. And that's, again, we don't have a proposal. This is the one use in this incredibly important economic development overlay district. This is the one use that's prohibited. And
And
you
it
know.
was prohibited before that district was even
Right.
done. It was when it was the S1.
Right, but you have some high-density hotels. You have an incredible amount of economic development, which has yielded not only a lot of reliable, significant tax revenue, but spin-off development. And you think about multifamily proximate to transit. Craft Group has not been involved in any 40B development here. It is the type of development, if you invest in it, that can continue to create sort of a livable 24/7 community that supports these local businesses and that creates more economic development. And if you do it in a thoughtful way, as Dan suggests, you can do it in a way that's not impactful and that also supports the commuter rail and ensures the viability of the commuter rail, well into the future. And so I can see the concern, but I think your obligation as a board, and I know you're aware of this, is to basically create the zoning that provides the opportunity. Mm-hmm. If the opportunity is illusory, it's not really an opportunity, right?
So why don't you give me a definition of your term illusory?
Well, I would say that the existing draft that I saw doesn't get you there.
Here, if you want to, we just got hot off the presses. We had our consultant look at it and where the adjustments have been made and the density's been adjusted, so you meet the test.
How do you yield 1,152 units?
Actually, 1,162 on this.
Yeah, it's 1,100. We changed the unit per acre, 20. There's a compliance model and we just changed it till it worked.
The other thing that I'm wrestling with is one of the reasons that you said you don't prefer District 2 is because you would lose parking. If you do what's in here, which is you want to build commercial there versus residential because it's more money. Totally get it. We're all in business, right? But you're going to lose parking there.
There's parking there, so
There's parking what?
Parking garages.
They can create parking garages.
Okay, and that would make up for the
loss of ground parking, yes.
Okay, that's what I need.
So Paige, just in looking at, quickly looking at Goldson's summary here, there's a minimum lot area that was in the draft that I previously reviewed, and Barney and I talked about it, that would seem to constrain, you can say you're going to yield 22 or 23 units an acre, but if you have a minimum lot area in there, doesn't that conflict?
But if you look at the formula, it's been reduced.
I see the potential District 2 here still having a minimum lot size. So these are the types of concerns that, again, they're not our issues to solve, but we'd like to be helpful.
But there's no issue because, I'm not saying I'm in support of anything right now, but the model says we will be in compliance if we use District 2.
The model is just a guide, and you can't count on the model. It's ultimately the draft narrative that Barney's been working so hard on. If it has a minimum lot size that says 8.5 units an acre.
But if the model says we can do it, do you have quantitative proof that we cannot?
We'll have to tweak the bylaw to reflect, we just got this today,
Yeah.
So we'll have to tweak the bylaw.
So here's
to reflect.
I think we all need to recognize that we can do it here. Let's just go on that assumption. The consultant has said that we can meet the letter of the law by doing it here. You folks want us to consider other ones, totally fine, but let's spend the time on that versus you debating whether Lot 2 works or not. Because we have experts who tell us that we pay.
So, Mr. Chairman, through you, we're not debating anything. What we were shared, we're just looking at this literally today. District 2, as was reflected in the last board discussion, did not comply, period. Mm-hmm. We brought that to your attention. So we're trying to help. We actually really would like to see a partnership here where we could be supportive and help the the town with a compliant bylaw. The location and the ultimate details of that district are up to the town, right? But they're not going to be, as the chair points out, they're not going to be determined by this board alone. It's going to be by town meeting. And we think, a really good history of working with you and working with the town to overcome and develop successful projects, including, for, recent example, the investment and the time and effort that went into the soccer rezoning for a successful redevelopment of residential property. That, if we asked you that today, you might be reticent. You might say that's not going to happen. But in working with the community, we overcame those challenges together.
So to Tracy's point, I personally would like to just, and you don't have to, again, it's your decision to do what you'd like, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on some of the options that have been put on the board.
So here's my question, Dan. So you mentioned, there's been a history of, we prefer to do 250 some units. That doesn't help us in this situation. If you could come up with a place where you could do 250 units, going we wouldn't be having this conversation. But, that's, according to Mr. Tam and the government, we're going to have to meet that requirement of, 50 developable acres and 1,152 units.
Well, I can tell you how you do it.
On the face of it is ridiculous, but
You can do it. I think Paige rightfully pointed out, it's the economics. And I think that the density that was proposed in the last draft, Barney, correct me if I'm wrong, with the minimum lot area that was included in the draft you provided, it came to about 8.5 units an acre, notwithstanding that it said 15 elsewhere in the bylaw. And it also limited the height for those 39 acres, and it required certain setbacks. So without nerding out on this, that, if you have 40 acres and you have those restrictions, we know on our side of this table that we're never going to trade the parking that's out there for essentially townhome development there. Now, it's theoretically could be made to comply with those limits, but no one's ever going to build it because there's much more valuable existing uses out there. And the investment that Dan has shown in terms of what's to come is much more likely based on just on land value. You combine that with a sub-district, a smaller sub-district. It could be as small as 5 acres, and you allow for greater density there.
And can there be a development agreement that goes along with the sub-district?
Sure. And that's so you have this 40 acres, or it might be 50, depending on the latest and greatest.
It's 50. Can we just say it's 50? It's 50.
I haven't seen the 50.
Okay, whatever.
But
regardless, go ahead.
The chair has asked how you would potentially regulate this to comply, to bring a yield of 1,152, yet limit effectively and practically limit the potential development to a couple hundred units. And I think you do it by the economics. You do it by targeted sub-districts. So the restrictions that's in your existing District 2, effectively, as I've read it, would limit it to basically townhomes, which no one's going to build over there. Because this is EDA land. And this is the development that we want over there.
I get it.
And then you take a sub-district, much smaller, and on balance, you allow for greater density there, 25 units an acre, on a much smaller sub-district. That allows for the balance between the lower density main district and the sub-district. So you net out at 15 units an acre, you comply, and you've limited your potential risk in terms of the total number of units that could practically be developed.
So let me ask you a very serious question. Where were you guys with your lobbying effort when the government was putting this thing together and force feeding it to the Commonwealth? I mean, if you knew what you wanted to do up there, and let's be honest, you guys had the ear of the past governor and probably this governor too, when this thing was being formulated, and you're one of the most likely places, especially knowing that you'll have the high potential to get a full-time, train station there. Where were you in, knowing that there was a potential here that something like this could be the result in terms of getting them to reduce that demand?
I think that's unfair, Mr. Chair, to put that on us. This was a legislative effort that did not have our involvement.
Why not?
But you had influence, let's be honest. You've had influence for 30 years, 40 years.
Well, that's,
and it's going to impact you.
I can say from our perspective, we were unaware. And that's
Here's what I'm wrestling with, and I can't play poker because I know my face is not very good right now. I appreciate the approach you guys took coming in. You want to work with us. It's our decision, whatever. Let's just lay everything on the table. Is you have a financial interest in this not happening the way Paige has proposed it. And that's okay to admit. I feel like you guys are trying to dance around the elephant in the room. You have a financial interest. You run a business. Totally respect that. But let's put that on the table and we'll recognize it. You can respect the position we're in, and then we can work together to come up with something. But I honestly feel like that it's coming across very insincere, I'll be honest, and which I've never said about the craft organization in all my years. But let's just, admit what it is and stack hands and try to figure out something that works for both sides, recognizing that both sides have each side has a different interest.
Mr. Chair, through you, I can only comment on our position, and we've been very honest with this board and very direct, and we've always been that way. If we agree, we'll tell you. If we disagree, we'll tell you, as we are this evening. If there's a financial interest, it's not that we have a proposal. This land, again, we have no involvement, zero, none, in identification of this as a potential district.
We know that.
We've obviously been supportive of transit, and that's been the extent of our involvement.
And I think the important piece is we're trying to figure out a way to understanding the town's position, trying to, I think, Tracy, to your point, trying to find a middle ground.
But just like
it's not even middle ground. It's just trying
to figure out, can we come to a place that we're all supportive of and stand in front of town meeting? But I appreciate the way you guys started off. But this is a business negotiation, and and I'm totally open to considering the ideas, and I appreciate the ideas. It's always good to vet them, but just come out and say, if we do District 2, that goes against craft's interests, the craft organization.
No, it does not. It does not. So, again,
Peter,
the concerns that we've raised, and I interrupted you. I apologize.
it's okay. Stop trying to position it, and it's just, you have an interest, and I get that, and we have an interest. And let's just try to put our heads together and see if we can meet as much as each party's interest as possible. But craft doesn't want to the craft organization doesn't want us to put it there because they're never going to build townhomes there, which I get. And you guys want to be able to build commercial. That's in craft's best interest. I get that. You're for craft
well,
organization.
I actually think it's in the EDA, which is the town's overlay district here, calls for that land to be used for higher and better uses.
Okay, so
if you want to overlay it with housing, that's fine, but it's not going to accomplish anything.
But here's my question. So say we look at the yellow. If I live in those areas, how is this? I kind of like the idea of sub-districts, to be quite honest, but they are closer to residential, and we represent the residents, right? The chances of this passing are tough anyway, to Kevin's point. Putting them closer to residential, this whole thing's gonna tank. And then we're not in compliance, our town loses money, maybe the craft organization would like to make up the difference, and we could be sued.
See, the real, key thing here is that we're required to create a district. We're not required to have anybody build it. And I'm not saying that that's our obligation. That's not what we're trying to do. But with that's the bottom line, is that that is what the Commonwealth is saying. You must create a district. If the owners of the land or the proposed development doesn't make sense to, the people who can lease the land, buy the land, whatever, and they don't develop it, that does not impact the town's concept of saying it meets the letter of the law.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Say we do District 2.
Yeah.
Does that prohibit them
No.
from building a commercial property?
I don't know the answer to that.
No, because it's an overlay, so the underlying zoning will still be in effect.
So
I'd like to ask a question that goes along with what Tracy said. If we did approve, or if we got approval through town meeting for District 2, at some point in time, would the sub-districts proposed or an alternative to these be an option that could go across the table as well? Because if
Sure, I
that's
would
the
think
case,
you
we're
could-
wasting a lot of time right now.
No, I would think you could absolutely, I think you owe the state a net, 50 acres, 15 units
It change
equivalent.
what those 50
So if you
acres
do
are.
one way to sort of get it off the books and then you refine it,
Yep.
I don't see a problem with that. I mean, no one's tested it, obviously it's too new, but I think that all they care about is getting the numbers. So as long as it
So if we
meets
do,
the model and the compliance requirements, I think we'll be set.
so if District 2 does meet them, if District 2 does, and the papers say it is the most beneficial location from a residential abutting situation, and it doesn't prohibit them from doing anything they want on their property, on that property.
Stands the best chance of getting approved at town
Well,
meeting.
I
And
don't
that's the
understand
sole
the-
reason we did it, is that we're trying to get
I
it
don't
at town
understand the
meeting.
downside. They're protected. You can go build your thing if you want. You don't have to build townhomes. We meet the letter of the law, and it's got the best chance to pass a town meeting. That's a no-brainer to me.
I think, what we're seeing, again, that's where the interests come in. I think we've all known for a while, and I'm going to speak for them, but know that I don't speak for them. I think we've always known the Crafts have some certain lands that they'd like to do some residential. So I think this is an opportunity for them to maybe get some of that residential they've always wanted, and we'd be somewhat effectively taking that opportunity away by putting it in this location because it doesn't meet sort of their needs in that. And I'm taking liberties here, but I think that's the general gist, is that it doesn't really work for their model.
But if this were to pass, which is still going to be a stretch,
Yeah.
if this were going to pass, you could always go to the state and say, look, nobody's building this. We have an alternative offer. Look this over. Now the Crafts come forward with this nice deal, this multi-phase and campuses, whatever. Okay, now we go to the state, and if it'll satisfy them at that time.
She said
I'm sure
yeah.
they're
Well,
gonna
it still would
listen.
have to go to town meeting, and that,
yeah.
town meeting's the hardest
That's
test.
the hard
That's
thing.
going to be
We'd have to go
hard
back to
sell.
town meeting
That's going to
again.
be hard sell.
So can I ask,
Oh, yeah.
Can I ask a question? In the yellow box, the yellow circles? No?
Okay.
I can ask that second. But right now, is this zone solely commercial?
Terminals.
Not Ashcroft, I think.
No, not Ashcroft.
So which ones would
This is-
allow you to develop townhomes, residential, where you can't develop today?
Say that again, please.
What, I don't know if I'm asking it right.
I think I know.
I don't think any of the districts would allow townhomes today,
'Cause
period.
they're all-
Even the
it's
residential
R40.
wouldn't.
We
Yeah.
could do single-family residences
Yeah.
here.
Right. What about the terminals?
It's S1.
That's one.
It's S1.
So,
And this is obviously S1 EDA, and this is actually split a little bit between R40 and S.
so this recommendation benefits the Kraft Kraft organization, excuse me, because it allows them to do for one parcel, few parcels that they cannot build residential on today.
And the S1.
And it allows residential at a higher density, like right now on Ashcroft, they could put, one house per acre. And obviously, well, I think what Peter was contemplating was a little higher than that, much higher than that. I don't know what numbers. So it gives them a multifamily capability where there doesn't currently exist one on residential and obviously on the commercial.
You had a question about density, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, so under the S1, the underlying S1, what's going to be allowed there?
What do you mean for housing?
No, there's no multifamily allowed there under the existing
No.
S1.
No,
So
there'd be
this-
no housing allowed there.
So this benefits the Crafts family, the Craft organization, because it turns S1 into residential
For the certain district.
for the
not
certain
whole
districts, not for the whole
It would be
thing.
an overlay again.
It'd be an overlay.
Right.
So
Which is really no different than what you're asking for in District 2.
two quick points, I think, to clarify, Tracy. One question that you were asking, and one that Paige made a point of. We've all been around long enough, I think, to appreciate that town probably has one opportunity at this. You're going to try to comply. You're going to review with EOHLC. They're going to tell you whether or not you're on the right track. You're going to get it through town meeting. If it's approved by town meeting, then municipal law unit will approve it, and it'll become part of your bylaw as an overlay. I don't think, realistically, I think we're fooling ourselves to think that somehow we're going to revisit this and rejigger and come up with sub-districts after the fact. That's the first point. The second point is, when you want to put the cards on the table, Tracy, and you want us to be very direct, clearly the benefit here would be to allow for use that's not allowed
Thank you.
in any of these areas. And it's unusual because the variety of uses and the density and intensity of use in the EDA is by design very flexible. And that has led to the economic development out there. So it is strange when I read the draft bylaw that the draft bylaw would actually limit and be much more restrictive, almost punitive for this use, in the sense that 70 feet is allowed as of right out there in the EDA and S1 today.
Height, you're talking.
And this would restrict it to 35 feet for this particular use. Issues like parking garages and structured parking, is unclear to me whether or not they're intended to be allowed by right or not. The density requirement is so restrictive that it would allow effectively only townhomes, which, and this is my second point, townhomes won't pass compliance. If you adopted 50 acres with a townhome type concept, you'll never get, Mr. Chair, the yield that you need. So where you're...
But I think
yeah.
if we look at what was passed out, I think some of those concepts are going to have to change to meet the letter of what's been presented.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a draft
but
of
that won't be, but my point is that won't be townhomes. That would be multifamily. And that would mean a much denser development, whether it's in your District 2, as has been expanded, or anywhere else. So I do think that there's potentially a thoughtful approach where you use sub-districts to your advantage.
Are you still thinking about using a 70-foot height in those sub-districts?
I think you would need to use something, the hotel, for instance, that's out there, the new hotel Dan and I were contemplating, it's somewhere around 50 feet in height.
Is that not the Renaissance, the
The
other one?
Renaissance, yeah. They're roughly the same height, the Renaissance.
And that's a residential type use, we could say, even though it's a commercial use. The compliance principles really call for you to consider existing land uses in the surroundings. Why would you allow for 70 feet in height and then restrict multifamily to 35? It's strange, right? Why would you allow for great flexibility in terms of density and intensity of use and then restrict it to 8.5 units an acre? there's something off about that. But, Mr. Chair, to your question, I think you could preserve District 2 with, and you could take either a piece of District 2 and allow for a greater intensity within a localized area, right? So that your net is 15 units an acre to comply, but it would effectively restrict a project to a couple hundred units. You could do that, or you could keep District 2 low intensity, or you could, you could do any number of things depending on where you want density.
Can I ask a question? All we're trying to do is meet the letter of the law imposed. So financial viability shouldn't factor in here for us, correct?
Not for the town, it shouldn't.
Which is who we represent.
But Mr. Chair, it does, to your question about, you're going to have to come up with a district that can yield 1,152 units. Yet at the same time, I appreciate that you may not want all of those 1,152 units ever being realized.
Well, and if we were going to have them realized, maybe that District 2 would be an ideal place for it, because it doesn't border on existing, residential things in that neighborhood on your side of the highway. I mean, before even the dream of the current Gillette Stadium, S1 restricted housing up there forever. No housing of that type was ever allowed on either side of Route 1. So, not only is the state asking us to, excuse the expression, shove it to ourselves. They're trying to say whatever law you had in the past is just non-existent. It doesn't apply. This is the new rule in the Commonwealth. So that it's not going over very well. And I'm not saying necessarily at the board level, but certainly amongst the community. As I mentioned earlier, there's people who are already very unhappy about this based on the fact that we are way above where we need to be, in terms of the affordable housing component in our community. And the other thing that I find very frustrating, if you want to talk about frustrating, is why is it that only 10% in this zone has to be affordable, but anywhere else in our town, it's 25%. Not that that's a serious thing either, but, why is that?
Well, when the law was passed, it actually had zero affordability.
Okay, but you know what I'm saying.
No, I'm saying that it's contrary to the whole purpose of what everything,
Yes, that's my point, is that, it's just a pig in a poke.
I think I'm going to move away from Kevin.
And look, listen, we feel very strongly about the fact that we have a very good working relationship with the Kraft Group. We are very supportive. Before this whole thing came flying down out of Boston, the idea that you guys wanted to do EDA, development up there for all kinds of, scientific things or other types of high-tech things, we were all for that, and we would love to help you do that,
We still are.
Yeah, and we still are. You're right, and we still are. It's this just kind of like, and it really isn't, you're right, it's not a Kraft Group issue. It's a feeling like the state is jamming this to this community and other communities, but we really can only deal with what's here. So it's frustrating. This I would say, let's put it this way. District 2 was certainly a well thought out first draft for how we think we can comply. And
That has the highest likelihood.
that had the highest likelihood of getting passage at a town meeting. I mean, when we first started looking at this, we knew from past, conversations that Ashcroft, Hallowell on that street, those areas there might be areas that would be under likely consideration by, the Kraft Group for areas that would be, an ideal situation to do some type of housing. But in looking around the community, not just your area, but also looking at these other areas where there is, a district that has affordable housing in it, there was already, and it wasn't a very scientific, type of analysis. But when people were approached there, they were immediately saying, no, we don't want that because we think it'll become overrun with, more of that type of development. So it's difficult for you, and it's also difficult for us.
No, and I think we heard that message. That's
Yeah.
why we call it offered alternatives.
Yeah. And I want to be clear, I don't hate your alternatives. I just don't know that they're going to have as much of a possibility of passage at a town meeting as District 2 would. And I'm not even so sure that that'll pass either. We don't know. I mean,
We have, I can appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, and we'd like the opportunity to continue to work with you on this.
Right.
We think that this is, I can appreciate that this is not necessarily the board or the town's choice. You're being forced to confront a new law and to bring your bylaw into compliance, notwithstanding that you've made significant progress on housing development. I think we just see it as an opportunity to round out what is a multi-use site and a very important economic generator. And housing can be very helpful in supporting those other uses and continuing to drive economic development along the corridor. And to have it proximate to transit makes some sense. So when this fell into our lap, we raised our hands and wanted at least the opportunity to think about it very deliberately with you. And to think about it in a way that might be able to actually create the opportunity. Again, there's no proposal for the future. If District 2 is ultimately where this board, they don't want to, you decide you don't want to examine any other sub-districts, District 2 is going to have to comply to yield 1,152 units at a minimum of 15 units an acre. That means 50 acres at a minimum it's going to be more like 25 units an acre as of right. And so I question, and I can talk to Barney, but I question whether some of the restrictions that are in there will have to be revisited by the board, including height. Because I just don't think,
they would be.
I don't think you can get that yield with 3-story height.
And that's why it's a draft. We know we're going to have to amend.
But we do think that if done really thoughtfully, you can mitigate and protect the town in a way that you're not going to get overwhelmed, but also get a successful potential future project, which is transit-oriented and that can, not have impacts or adverse impacts on the community.
Question? I know we've toyed with, putting over the lodge or Sylvan. What were the downsides of that? Why? Excuse me?
The distance to the,
But we only have to put part of the overlay within that half mile or whatever it is radius, right?
Correct. You could do districts away from the train station. So
But how much has to be by the train station?
40%.
50%, I think.
Which one?
Our consultant says 40, but,
I think that's changed because it's,
okay. So we could, there was, again, Kevin's point, which was a non-scientific, sort of floating this strategy out to a few members of the community. There was like, whoa, that's why we ended up where we ended up, is to give it the best chance to pass, because if you, brought it into the community, even thinking we were so smart as to overlay over an existing high-density residential, there was pushback. So that's where we just kind of took the clean approach.
Gotcha.
The 11th hour, and that's why some of the memos were a little, they originally contemplated 2 districts, and we, at the last minute, went to 1.
Yeah, having gone through comprehensive permits with respect to those areas and knowing what the neighborhood opposition would be, or was,
Yes.
I could just imagine what the opposition would be if we were to include them as districts here, or sub-districts here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they think they paid their dues.
Exactly.
We think we've paid our dues with the state on 40B. And it's the same thing.
So Dan and Peter, in these yellow areas that you've outlined there, how many units are in there, ballpark? Do you have any idea?
It could be, it's expandable, I guess is what I'm saying,
Well, it's expandable up.
So,
It's expandable height.
No, I would say, if you did it at 5 acres, you come up with, 200 or 300 units. If you did it at 50 acres, you're going to end up with more. So I think that was my point earlier, to even having the discussion, and maybe even you get into a partnership that we can.
I don't know, Paige and Gabby you may have been involved in these charrettes with certain land planners when they have these issues. You're going to chuckle, but you may have grandkids or kids of a certain age. I remember going to a couple of these housing charrettes, and if you say, in this case, your yield has to be 1,152. You can take a bunch of Legos that represent 1,152 units, and you can take a plan with the half acre and say, where do you as a board want to locate some density, knowing you have to use up all these Legos, and half of your Legos have to be within this circle. And you could say, well, terminals. We'll take a portion of the terminals. We won't impact the neighbors. We'll keep it on Route 1. Let's put some Legos there. Ashcroft. We like Ashcroft for proximity reasons, but we don't want to impact North Street. Maybe we can put some Legos here. Maybe we consider, access and other considerations and buffers and wetlands. Maybe we can put some Legos there. But those types of charrettes I've been involved with, and they're actually kind of instructive to show and represent density. And you as a board can say, and you back into the bylaw. So when you ask, what do those represent? It's up to you where you want density, knowing you have this yield. Now, when I said that you can protect the town, you can do that.
Would you, because I was just going to ask about that.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure that that's exactly what you meant to say, but apparently it was.
It is, and when I said, Paige, the first point she made was something to the effect of this isn't necessarily the highest and best use for EDA property, which is kind of zoning for townhomes on incredibly valuable areas along Route 1.
Well, I don't think she meant it about the townhomes. I think she meant the fact that, you guys had a higher and better use.
And that is true. And so, we can acknowledge that there is a higher and better use for that property, including its existing use for parking, which is very, very important, as we've been working with you all these years on preserving that parking. You could keep relatively low density, but allow for multifamily use on large portions of that, knowing that from an economic perspective, and this is where economics actually do play a role in the town's consideration, knowing that that won't ever be realized because it's not economically viable. And then you can concentrate some density in an area that you think appropriate, where you want to stack some of those Legos. That's all I'm saying.
So you're suggesting that none of these numbers matter, if that approach was taken?
I think you can have a compliance model that will comply
Comply with what?
with the state standards,
With the numbers?
with the numbers, but that from an economic perspective, much of which would never be realized because it's not going to pencil out. No one's going to be building townhomes where the land value far exceeds the value of any townhome that you're selling.
I guess I would just be very wary of that proposition.
Well, you have to be careful, but I can tell you no one's going to be building townhomes in those parking lots. And I'm saying this to be very honest, and we're not trying to contravene the spirit and intent of the law. It would still allow.
I might be.
It would still, what the law requires, that, Jeff, is that on balance, you net a minimum of 15 units an acre. So you can be very shrewd about how you identify density. To Paige's point, you can't identify the stadium parcel because it's town property. You can't overlay an institution like a hospital, right? But there's nothing that precludes you from having low density in a high-value district and then concentrating higher density in a very localized area.
Got it.
And that gets you that yield without opening the town up. Or you could just take the approach that, the direction you're going, which is a single 50-acre or so area with high density at 25 or 30 units an acre.
But the likelihood of that ever happening is low.
Well, I don't know about that.
I would never take that for granted.
I wouldn't take it for
Take
granted,
it for granted.
but
I mean, it's going to depend on what Barney ends up, preparing, right, in terms of density.
Right, the high density would help that situation.
But one of our problems now is time. We don't have time.
yep.
If we had started having this conversation a year ago,
So
we don't have time. This has to be ready for a Springtown meeting, correct?
I have some experience to share with the board. I think you know better than we do what your timing obligations are. Obviously, you need to have adopted a bylaw that's compliant by year's end. And I know that you're focused on a Springtown meeting.
Because we have no guarantee of a fall one.
Yeah, and then I guess the fallback would be if it's close or you need to go back to the drawing board, you could go back in the fall, presumably, if there was that intent.
Personally, I think we have a timing issue, to Gary's point. I think our best bet to get this passed is District 2. If it doesn't pass, it gives us some more time to see if we can come up with something that would pass. Although I think if District 2 doesn't pass, I don't think we're going to find anything. Maybe I'm wrong. But I don't think we have an option right now. I think from a timing perspective, District 2 is the one that has the highest likelihood to pass. And I think we gotta go for it.
Well, I think I'd like to clarify that, yes, it's a timing thing now because here we are in January, but, the will of the community, we did a conversation on housing for how many years, and the accessory apartment bylaw didn't even pass. So, there is not again, as planners, we would adapt. We would do charrettes. We'd do all the things. We'd get the grants. We'd do it. We couldn't get the housing production plan passed. We couldn't get accessory apartments passed. There does not seem to be a strong will towards expanding housing in this community.
But everyone's complaining we don't have enough.
I get that.
This is a whole different thing.
People don't.
Then if you tell people you can have 1,100
Right.
plate in one spot, that's a huge thing. That's a huge.
This is a whole different thing.
So
I think we've been
I just
very
want to make
supportive
clear
of
that,
housing efforts.
this is not something that we're like, oh, we just ran out of time. There wasn't really a will to push it forward. Now, if the community rides up and says, hey, no, we want alternative approaches, we want to try this, we think Ashcroft would be a great location. Honestly, having been through 2 Washington Street and all that, I don't think that, I think even the lowest, I think even townhomes on Ashcroft would raise a lot of people's concern. I think anything on the terminals would cause a lot of concern. So honestly, I think this decision here was sort of taking the temperature read of the community and taking the path of least resistance in an effort to try to get something passed, which we all agree, I'm not even sure this is going to pass. I don't know that it will, but I think we're doing our very best to bring something forward that meets the letter of the law. We might have to go back again and again. When we ever sat in one of the sessions and, we kind of thought, well, we'll try it, and if it doesn't work, oh, well. And they said, no, we expect this to take 1, 2, or 3 town meetings. I mean, you could have picked me up off the floor at that point. So this could be something we spend the next few years on, but I think it's important. We see Milton, and that I believe is going to be a test case.
What's happening with Milton? I don't mean to
So
interrupt.
Milton's,
It's a special town, a representative town meeting, and now a group of citizens has created a referendum
To undo it.
to undo it, correct.
and theirs
What's the
was due
likelihood that
theirs
that
was
would
due
happen?
December 31st because they're rapid transit. So they complied, all 12 communities that were rapid transit did comply, but now there's a chance that Milton will go back on compliance. And we're all watching it because that's kind of the first community to say no. And we assume the state will go after them. I think this May we'll see a lot more communities in our boat.
Well, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, we will not be alone, and there's 165 other communities that are,
And as far
potentially in
as
that
far as
boat.
Milton goes, they are classified as a rapid transit community.
Yes.
They only have a trolley.
Yeah.
They only have a trolley. And,
That's amazing.
yeah,
It's rapid, huh?
doesn't even go to
They drive it quickly.
downtown Boston.
It
It
seem
does not.
problematic to
I've
have this
had
kind
many
of
conversations with folks.
approach.
So that's kind of the background. I mean, that's, you guys know, and I acknowledge you doing your very best, and, I just don't know. We're tired of the fight, honestly. We don't want to be the face of this housing battle and try to sell it at this point, unless the community, reaches out and tells us this is something we want, but even our own board has had some trouble getting on board with accessory apartments, housing production plan, the whole thing. So there really just isn't, we don't live in town. We're trying to, but we're going to do what the law says. And that's what was required by us. And so we're going to meet the letter of the law, and we're going to try. And then it's up to the townspeople.
And so I think what Paige said that is sort of an important takeaway for us is that there is going to be wiggle room if you're not in compliance at the end of the year. Unless
What do
you're
you mean
planning
by
on
that?
having 3 more town meetings in the next 6 months.
What do you mean by wiggle room?
It's going to take time.
Oh, okay.
And almost guaranteed, there's going to be some sort of political, if not solution, massaging of this going forward. It's inevitable.
I know Kevin asked about, why wasn't the crafts on Capitol, whatever they call it, lobbying. What about Feeney and Barrows? Where have they been? How much involvement? How much?
They've tried. I mean, when they passed, it was the Baker administration, so it was Republican.
Yeah.
But then, now it's the challenge is there is a housing shortage. And I recall, I think it was Feeney saying that, a lot of business leaders have said to these legislators, we need something to change. We're having trouble bringing employees into the state. We're doing it. And so we get that. And that's what my message has always been to the state is, help us out with the messaging. Us on the front lines here, we can't say anything more to sell this. We can't convince people who have their homes and have their property values to do this, to their perceived detriment. So we've been trying to, I might have mentioned, we got a grant to hire a PR firm to try to sell this. We haven't gotten a single proposal. We just learned today that the company we hoped was going to do it did not submit. So we are going to we're going to have to go back out again. So unless someone comes in, but they're due tomorrow. So, here we had this innovative idea of all right, let's sell this, let's educate, let's market, let's show people why housing matters. Let's, we've talked about this stuff. We can't do this alone. And we did. We got funding from the state to do it. And now we haven't been able to find anybody to help us do it. So it's a struggle, but we do think more messaging, we do think it's an important matter. We do think there's a housing shortage. We don't think that the average resident of Foxborough feels it. And the voters of Foxborough are ready to stand up and say, yes, we want more housing. We want our neighbors, so.
I'm hearing just the opposite.
I think that.
Really, where are they?
No, meaning that, people are saying we need more housing in Foxborough, but nobody.
But not in their backyard.
Right.
Correct. And the other thing that you guys need to recognize, and it's not, I don't mean this from the board, but people look at this a little bit and they say, who benefits? And they look at this and they say, okay, the craft group, if we were to say, great proposal, we're going to go with that. There would be a lot of Sturm und Drang about this, because they would say, okay, those guys are going to get exactly what they want. They've been trying to get housing for years up there. They're going to get that. And they're still going to have the opportunity to develop the economic development area, which they've also always wanted. So I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. I'm not saying that you guys haven't made a push to do the economic development up there, and it just hasn't been able to come, not through any fault of your own, because of conditions in the Commonwealth, types of uses that still want to stay in Cambridge and not move out to the suburbs, all the things that you guys probably know a lot better than I'll ever know. But, that's a complication.
Wouldn't though that same concept be applicable to District 2? Because that's all ours anyway.
Yeah, it would be, but it's less controversial in terms of okay, at least it's not next to me. Meaning, not me personally, but meaning the residents.
Walpole friends, though.
Well, that's just true.
Yeah, I Mr. Chair, I can appreciate your point. I think the other side of that is this is an organization that has proven its bona fides in terms of economic development for the benefit, obviously, of the successful organization, but very much of the town in terms of...
We definitely consider you to be a great corporate neighbor. There's no question about that.
So, and I think...
Anybody here who doesn't feel like, the craft group has been beneficial to the community of Foxborough. I think we all believe that.
But we also can't put the interests of the craft organization ahead of the residents.
And I don't think we're asking you to do that.
No, we're not. This is your bylaw, your compliance, and ultimately, the organization just happens to own a lot in this area, and they've made substantial investments in this area. So we see this as the opportunity to round out a very significant economic development initiative by allowing for residential use in a meaningful way to provide for a future opportunity. That's it. I do think that if you're going to hold a public hearing on this next month, you do have an opportunity. I have yet to see a bylaw that's compliant. You're working through this. If the board wanted to see how this might stack up with a sub-district, we could do a comparison. Be happy to work with Dan and Barney, independent of whatever Barney is directed to do.
Actually, when Peter's done, I'd like to speak.
Please do.
Go ahead, finish.
No, that's it.
Okay. So I'm going to try to not be defensive, in as much as I've heard my name invoked several times. My objective was to put words on paper and to, in doing that, comply with the state mandate. The minimum lot size, the building height, the setbacks were all discussed amongst Gabby, Paige, me, and our consultant. And I'm not a mathematician. I don't do anything about modeling. I'm fortunate that I graduated from high school because my math was so awful. If she says, she meaning Laura Smead, who was our consultant, says that we comply with the guidelines, that's fine with me. I believe her. Right. I have no reason to doubt her. I understand exactly what Dan and Peter are saying, and the idealistic, altruistic, and philosophical side of me says, I agree with you 100%. This is the best way to achieve the objective of meeting the housing crisis in eastern Massachusetts. But the practical side of me says that won't fly at town meeting. And that's really our primary concern, our primary objective is to comply with the statute. And I think what we have on paper right now, and again, I'm assuming that the modeling is correct, allows us to comply with the state statute. Paige has heard me say this probably too many times in the context of the comprehensive permits. I believe in a diversified housing stock, and I think the town benefits from a diversified housing stock. And again, idealistically, I would go along with what you're saying. And we also talked about a 70-foot,
We did.
not necessarily as a requirement, but as something that the planning board could,
The district would support it, yes.
could allow. But we felt that would not be in the best interest of the town looking forward to what we need to comply with. And that's where we are.
And we will be tweaking the bylaw in light of what we got today.
Yes.
So what was printed, the draft bylaw that went out, is already out of date, and it will be tweaked to reflect the latest modeling.
But again, she's confident, she meaning our consultant is confident that we comply.
And just to clarify, this is Goldson Group, and they were paid for by the Mass Housing Partnership. They are part of the sort of 3A consultants that the state has retained to assist communities with MBTA 3A compliance. So we have, we're not the only community they're doing this for. So, they're not perfect. And the reason there was a mistake on the district, again, is a reflection of that the 11th hour, we changed from the split district to that, and it didn't get caught. So it wasn't that, it was wrong all along. We kind of switched gears at the 11th hour, and so we have to have a final conversation with them, but like Barney said, I feel confident that these technical folks, these consultants know this better than any of us know, and they've been doing this, and they're working closely with the Department of Housing and Community, whatever, HLC, whatever they're,
So is the next step, because we could rehash this for like 5 more hours, and I think we're saying the same thing over and over. So is the next step a public hearing on the 22nd of February? And in the meantime, Barry, now I'm calling you Barry, Barney will update the draft bylaw so that it aligns with what we just got from our consultant, and then we come back here on the 22nd, kind of do this again, but it'll have to go to a vote in terms of our support of it for town meeting or not support of it.
Right.
correct. And in the meantime, we'll submit something for the warrant with the tweaked bylaw. We will try to get HLC to look at it, but I have a feeling there's going to be a backlog. I can't guarantee we'll get a review, in timely fashion. But we will try to get this reviewed by them in advance of town meeting. There's always a risk, everybody, I think this is one of those things where the plane's kind of being built, not our plane necessarily, but also the state plane,
Yeah.
A lot of this information has been evolving.
That's only Alaska Airlines.
Just a procedural question about what you had just mentioned, Tracy. So does there need to be affirmative action from this board in order to get it on the warrant?
No, because it's going to go on the warrant before we meet on the 22nd.
Well, I guess what Jeff's saying is there needs to be a vote.
I'm not sure, though. Peter, maybe you can
Have to pass it.
chime in on this. The statute just talks about a report from the planning board.
Well, that's what I'm thinking.
I don't
We don't have to take a vote.
have to report that, 5 of us voted affirmatively and none, against or what. I think you just need a report from the planning board.
Do you mean to get it on the warrant?
That's what I'm talking about, yeah.
Is that your understanding, Peter? It's just a
Yeah,
report?
whether it's a report or a recommendation, like any other rezoning.
But it wouldn't be
Right,
like
but they're
a
talking
vote.
about actually physical, well,
See, because I'm
we have a
thinking of
handful
those
of
two
zoning.
separate things.
Yeah, we
like-
have a handful of zoning articles, and maybe that's on February 8th. Maybe you bring those forward to this board to look at, because Barney has some definitions.
Yeah, actually, I got a question. Would this be coming forward as a planning board article or as a select board article?
This,
Yeah.
Or is it a zoning?
I'd want
Well,
to
wouldn't it be
planning
zoning?
board. No, it will be planning board, I would assume. Usually the zoning comes from the planning board.
Okay.
But we do bring forward, a memo with all the zoning articles, and you guys vote to put it on. I, however, on February 8th will be in Aruba, so enjoy.
Zoom in, baby.
That's a bad
Sorry, no
attitude.
Wi-Fi.
That's a bad attitude. But back to Jeff's question, I don't think we got an answer, is do we need, so we can get it on the warrant.
Yep, we have a placeholder already.
So, okay, so we don't have to
No, but I think you want an official action by the planning board.
I agree,
sort of
but we don't have to do
sponsoring
it from a timing standpoint to get it on the warrant, because it's a placeholder.
Well, yes and no. I think before February 15th, in past fashion, we've always had you vote to put it on the warrant.
So then we'd have to do it at the meeting you're not at.
Correct.
Or why can't we just vote to put it on tonight? Because we know we're going to put it on.
You can, but I think we have other zoning articles that I'm worried about wouldn't be covered, and they're not on the agenda tonight.
But
So, because we have a couple definitions, we have the auditorium
we
stuff.
could do it on the 8th.
I have a couple of questions just for clarification and recap, and then hopefully we can call it a night. A, if we do decide to go with District 2, that covers our need for the state, even though it's going to be on a piece of property that will never be developed.
We don't know that.
I would never take that for granted, you know?
No, I'm just saying.
It is considered developable under the
Okay,
state standards.
Right. Second question. If we go with District 2, does that allow future nodules to possibly be brought forward?
The town can always do, town meeting would have to approve it.
Right, okay.
But it's a minimum of 50 acres, so you could always, I'm sure,
Right, so-
add more.
But if we were compliant with the 50 acres, these other nodules, at some point in time, if the craft group decided they wanted to come forward and try to get
So we could
zoning
shrink
change,
District 2 and add on
that
other
could be done.
nodules.
Or you could probably even add on, it doesn't say maximum, it says minimum 50 acres.
Right, but meaning we could put District 2 in its entirety, and then, I'm making this up, 5 years down, cut off like that bottom right portion and put it someplace else?
Where she said it's a minimum,
If you wanted to.
it's not 50, period, it's a minimum of 50.
Yep.
Is how it's worded. So if this is 50 acres in District 2, these could still be viable if zoning passed at a town meeting.
You can be up to the town at that point, whether to take it away or add it,
Right.
whether you have
Okay, I got it.
55 or 50, something like
Okay,
that.
that's it. That's all I needed.
Isn't this fun?
So February 8th, will everybody be here, except me?
I'm kind,
Presuming.
I might.
Why do you keep smiling when you say
Sorry.
that?
I might, yeah, we're gonna take the flowers back. If you guys don't mind. I might be in Manhattan, but I could Zoom.
Okay.
if I
It should
need
be quick, it's,
The 8th
we have
is
some auditorium zoning, we have zoning
It should be
definitions,
quick.
Those are simple.
and then we just have this, so it's
Well, he
really.
reviewed them. You reviewed them, right, with us last time, the other zoning articles?
I drafted the other ones that we've got on here.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we reviewed them last meeting, right?
We just did the auditorium.
Oh, okay.
mentioned the other one. We didn't
Yeah, I mentioned the other ones, right. The auditorium was the only one we
So you got
discussed.
us all on the 8th.
Okay, so at a minimum, just take a quick whiff through those, vote to put them on the thing, and, it'll be subject,
Just real quick, just for clarity, so it's my takeaway that there's not an interest to pursue this at this time.
I would agree. I can't, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I kind of agree with that statement because we've got to do what is most likely going to pass a town meeting.
We haven't got time to do otherwise.
I think honestly, to try to pull any of that forward for town meeting would be just a hand grenade without a pin. That's why I asked the question if that prevented potential development at a later date. The Lord only knows what we're going to get at town meeting.
Yep.
Right.
And please allow the craft organization to let our government know, our state government know, like, this is ridiculous.
If you want to do February 8th, I think the ad would have to go in by next Monday.
well, not an ad.
No, this is not the
No,
public
for the public
hearing.
hearing,
Not
yeah.
the public hearing.
This is just the board to sponsor him on the town meeting warrant.
Really?
Full community.
The ad would be
Where's
for
the
the 27th.
MBTA?
So
They
the
built,
public hearing is
there's
till
a
27.
80% built station.
Where?
Even though it's not
Putting the
even
articles
finished,
on
they're
the
making
warrant.
them,
Well, we don't have a full station.
Where?
I don't know, but I know that Taunton, New Bedford, and Foxborough were the three that were upgraded.
Are we a full-time station, like full?
We're a host community at this point, yeah, for the MBTA.
I know they designated as a such,
Or a
but
commuter rail community, no longer adjacent community.
Right, Right, and Taunton just got upgraded as
And do we
well.
have a full-time schedule?
Sort of-ish, not weekends.
So they designate it as without all the bells.
Yeah, it just keeps getting better and better.
Well,
Thank you.
we appreciate the board's time, and, well, I'll leave you with this nugget. We're here to help.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, make a motion to adjourn.
Play with my computer.
Second that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.